Kung Fu is dancing. The man who said it was 6'2", 200 pounds of tournament muscle. His name was Garrett Hollis, three-time national karate champion, a man who had knocked out opponents in under 30 seconds and smiled about it afterward. He didn't whisper it. He said it loud, loud enough for the entire room to hear, loud enough for the cameras in the corner to catch it on tape, loud enough that 12 other fighters turned their heads and waited. And Bruce Lee? Bruce Lee just looked at him. No anger, no reaction, just eyes, still, dark, and waiting like the surface of water before a storm. That was the moment everything changed. Most people in that room didn't know it yet, but 3 of those fighters would spend the rest of their lives trying to explain what happened next. It was 1967. Los Angeles was burning with a new kind of fever. Martial arts were exploding across America. Karate dojos were opening on every other street corner. Magazine covers featured tournament fighters with black belts and granite jaws. Trophies lined the walls. Trophies meant everything. And into this world walked a 26-year-old Chinese-American actor and martial artist who hadn't won a single American tournament because he refused to enter them. Bruce Lee was unlike anything the karate world had seen. He moved differently. He trained differently. He thought differently. He didn't believe in styles. He didn't believe in rules. He believed in what worked, in the half second before a man fell. But the karate establishment didn't see it that way. To them, Jeet Kune Do, Bruce's personal martial philosophy, was unproven, untested. It had no belt system, no tournaments, no trophies. It was fluid and chaotic and unrecognizable. To their trained eyes, it almost looked like choreography, like dancing. 3 fighters in that room shared that opinion loudly that evening. Garrett Hollis was the largest and the loudest. The other 2, Marcus Webb and Danny Sue, were his training partners, both ranked competitors, both built like men who had spent their entire lives preparing for violence inside a controlled square. They had been invited to a private demonstration, a closed gathering of martial artists held in a Santa Monica gymnasium. The host was a producer named Raymond Chu, who wanted to unite Eastern and Western martial arts for an upcoming project. He'd brought together karate experts, a judo champion, a wrestler, and several kung fu practitioners, including Bruce Lee. It was supposed to be a conversation. Hollis made it something else. He had walked in with his chest already out. He had shaken hands like he was testing grip strength. He had watched the kung fu demonstrations with his arms crossed and one eyebrow permanently raised. When a practitioner demonstrated a flowing form, a kata that emphasized circular motion and breath, Hollis had leaned over to Webb and muttered just loud enough, "That's not fighting, that's ballet." Laughter, low and brief, but laughter. Bruce didn't react. He was across the room, talking quietly to Raymond Chu, a cup of tea near his hand, his body relaxed. He'd heard it, everyone had heard it, but he continued his conversation as if the comment had been spoken in another language he didn't care to translate. That calm, that absolute practiced stillness irritated Hollis more than any comeback could have. He stepped forward. "Hey," he was addressing the room, but his eyes were locked on Bruce. "I want a serious question. I want someone to show me, practically, how Kung Fu handles a real striker. Not forms, not philosophy, real application." He smiled when he said real. The word was a weapon, and he knew how to throw it. The room tensed. Raymond Chu started to speak. Bruce raised one hand, barely, just a slight lift of 2 fingers, and Chu went quiet. Bruce turned from the wall and looked at Hollis for a long moment. "What do you want to know?" Bruce said. His voice was even, no edge, no performance. Hollis smiled wider. "I want to see it work against someone who actually hits hard." Webb and Sue drifted closer behind him, not dramatically, just drifting, the way satellites orbit a planet without being told to. "And you hit hard?" Bruce asked. 3 national titles. "Yeah, I hit hard." Bruce nodded slowly. Then he set down his tea. The room rearranged itself the way rooms do when they sense something is coming. People stepped back,
not all at once, one by one like a tide pulling out from shore. Chairs scraped, conversations died mid-sentence. The two cameramen near the far wall exchanged a glance and kept their lenses where they were. Hollis cracked his knuckles. It was theatrical. He knew it was theatrical. He didn't care. He outweighed Bruce by nearly 90 pounds. He was 6 inches taller. He had spent 15 years drilling combinations that had dismantled trained fighters in sanctioned competition. His front kick had been clocked. His cross had been measured. He was, by every external metric that the karate world respected, a weapon. Bruce stood in front of him in street clothes. No uniform, no stance, just standing, weight slightly forward, shoulders loose, hands at his sides. He looked, to the untrained eye, like a man waiting for a bus. Hollis found that insulting. "You're not going to take a stance?" he asked. "I'm already in one," Bruce said. Hollis exhaled through his nose. He began to circle, a habit, a trained instinct. He measured distance with his eyes. He calculated the gap. He told himself, one clean entry, that's all I need. He'd seen flashy martial artists before. Speed could be countered with timing. Skill could be broken by power. He told himself he would be respectful. He told himself he would only use half his force. He told himself a lot of things. Webb stood at the edge, arms crossed, watching. Sue was slightly behind him. The gym had gone so quiet you could hear the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. Hollis shifted his weight. His right shoulder dropped, a tell, a tiny one, the kind only a genius or a ghost would catch. Bruce caught it. Hollis launched his front kick. It was a good kick, fast, powerful, the kind that had ended matches in under 2 seconds. It never landed.
3 seconds later, Hollis was facing the wrong direction. No one in the room entirely understood how it had happened. One moment, Bruce was standing there, hands at his sides, that infuriating calm on his face. The next moment, he was elsewhere. Not behind Hollis, not to the side, just no longer where Hollis had aimed. Hollis turned. Bruce hadn't stepped back. He had stepped into the kick, inside it, past the arc of the leg, into the space where a kick can't reach and power can't follow. He'd moved at the precise moment Hollis committed, not before, not after, at. Hollis threw a cross. Fast, educated, the kind of punch that moved with a fighter's whole body behind it. Bruce's hand was already there, not blocking, redirecting. A slight angle, almost gentle, the way you'd guide a door that was already swinging. The punch grazed air. Hollis's momentum carried him forward half a step. And in that half step, Bruce was already inside his reach. His right hand stopped 1 inch from Hollis's jaw. 1 inch. He held it there. The room stopped breathing. Hollis blinked. He looked at the fist. He looked at Bruce's face. He looked back at the fist. "That was your jaw," Bruce said, quietly, not cruelly, just clearly. Hollis stepped back. Something moved across his face. Not quite fear, not quite anger. Something in between that men like him rarely feel and never name. He reset. His jaw tightened. The performance of calm was over. He came again. This time with intent. Webb hadn't moved during the first exchange, but he was reading it. His fighter's mind was cataloging everything: the footwork, the entry angle, the redirecting hand, the stopping point. He was trying to find the pattern. Every fighter has a pattern. Find it, break it, that was the formula. He thought he saw it. He told himself to wait for one more exchange. Bruce and Hollis clashed again. Faster this time, Hollis trying to close distance with volume, throwing combinations that his body knew by heart, counting on weight and reach to overwhelm the smaller man. It was like hitting smoke. Not because Bruce retreated, he didn't. He moved through the combinations, between punches, into gaps that shouldn't have existed. His responses were short and invisible and precise. A forearm deflection here, a half-step pivot there, an elbow check that turned Hollis's hook into nothing. And every time, Bruce's hands found Hollis's face, throat, and ribs, touching them without striking them, like a surgeon marking incision points. "You're open here," Bruce said, tapping Hollis's left ribs. "And here," the throat. "And here," the temple. Hollis was breathing hard now.
His chest was working. Webb stepped in. "Let me try," he said. Hollis backed off, grateful but too proud to show it. Webb was different, leaner than Hollis, faster. His tournament record included 3 knockout victories by kick alone. He had reach and timing, and he was, unlike Hollis, not angry. He approached Bruce with his hands up and his weight distributed professionally. Bruce looked at him with the same expression he'd worn since he set down his tee. Webb feinted. Bruce didn't move for the feint. Webb feinted again. Still nothing. Webb's eyes narrowed. He threw a real kick, a side kick, textbook, launched off his back leg with full rotation. Bruce was no longer standing there. He was beside Webb, inside his guard, one hand resting against his sternum, one hand positioned at the base of his neck. He hadn't hit him. He had simply arrived. "Your neck," Bruce said. Webb exhaled slowly. "How did you—" He stopped himself. Bruce stepped back. Sue didn't wait to be invited.
Danny Sue was the quietest of the 3. That made him the most dangerous. He hadn't spoken since he'd walked in, hadn't laughed at the kung fu comment, hadn't postured or circled or performed. He had simply watched, with the focused, patient stillness of a man who fights only when he is ready to win. He was 29 years old, former military. His karate wasn't sport karate, it was Kyokushin, the style built on full contact, on conditioning the body to absorb punishment and deliver it without ceremony. He had broken boards with his shins. He had fought on concrete. He had never, in his adult life, been knocked off his feet. He stepped into the space Webb had vacated. He didn't bow. He didn't speak. He simply raised his hands. And for the first time that evening, something shifted in the room's atmosphere. Even Hollis went still. Because Sue wasn't looking at Bruce the way Hollis had, with contempt, with ego, with the need to prove something in front of witnesses. Sue was looking at Bruce the way a predator looks at something it cannot yet categorize. That was different. Bruce looked back at him. And for just a moment, just one, the room felt like it was watching 2 different species recognize each other. Sue moved first. No feint, no setup. He closed the distance in 2 explosive steps and threw a body punch, a short, sharp hook to the midsection, the kind of punch that didn't need to be pretty because it had ended fights with sheer mechanical force alone. Bruce's left hand dropped, fractionally, impossibly fast, and redirected the punch off his hip. Sue felt the resistance. He adjusted mid-motion, a sign of elite training, and converted the hook into an uppercut. Bruce's head was no longer there. He had slipped left almost casually, and Sue's fist passed through the space where Bruce's jaw had been by less than 2 inches. Sue didn't stop. He kept coming. Combination, rotating angles, each strike educated and real and thrown with full intent. Bruce moved through all of it, not retreating, not blocking, moving, always moving, but never a wasted movement, never a single step that didn't mean something. He was a man walking through rain without getting wet. The room watched in absolute silence. 30 seconds passed. Sue had thrown perhaps 15 strikes. Not one had connected. He stopped. His chest was heaving, not from exhaustion, but from the controlled exertion of real intent. He looked at Bruce. His expression had changed. The predator's calculation had given way to something rarer in a man like Sue. Bewilderment. "You haven't hit me," Sue said. It wasn't a complaint. It was an observation. "No," Bruce agreed. "Why not?" Bruce was quiet for 1 beat. Then, "Because I didn't need to." He let that land. And then he demonstrated exactly what he meant. What happened next was not a fight. It was a lesson, the most expensive kind, the kind that costs a man his certainty. He turned to all 3 of them, Hollis still catching his breath near the wall, Webb standing with his arms loose at his sides, Sue directly in front of him, and he spoke. "You want to see Kung Fu? Not the forms, not the philosophy, the real thing?" No one answered. That was answer enough. He pointed at Hollis. "Come back." Hollis hesitated. Just 1 second, the length of a pride calculation, then stepped forward. "Throw your fastest punch," Bruce said. "Fastest. No holding back." Hollis looked at the people watching. He looked at Bruce. He threw it. The fastest punch he owned, the punch that had won him matches, the punch his body had rehearsed 10,000 times. It never arrived. Bruce's interception was so early, so far ahead of impact, that Hollis's fist had barely left his shoulder before Bruce's hand was already at his wrist, redirecting, controlling, guiding.
The force of the punch folded back into Hollis's own structure, and in less than 1 second, Hollis found himself turned sideways, off balance, his own momentum working against him, Bruce's fingers at the back of his neck. No impact, no pain, just helplessness. Complete, total, undeniable helplessness. The kind that doesn't come from being overpowered. The kind that comes from being red. Hollis went still the way animals go still when they've been caught, when the running is over and they know it. He stayed in that position, half-turned, off balance, Bruce's hand light as paper at the back of his neck, for what felt like a very long time. Bruce released him gently. Hollis straightened up. His face was unreadable. He took 1 step back, then another. He didn't say anything. He didn't have the words. The gymnasium held 12 people that night. Not one of them spoke. The fluorescent lights buzzed. Somewhere outside, a car passed on the street. Normal sounds from a world that had no idea what had just happened inside this room. Raymond Chu stood near the corner, his arms folded across his chest, his expression somewhere between stunned and reverent. He had organized this evening hoping for a discussion, a debate, perhaps a polite exchange of techniques. He had not anticipated a revelation. One of the cameramen, a young man named Paul, who had been recording quietly for the past 40 minutes, lowered his camera slowly. He looked at his colleague. His colleague looked back at him. Neither of them said anything either. Webb sat down on a nearby bench, not dramatically, not in defeat, just sat, the way a man sits when his legs decide they've processed enough standing. Sue remained where he was. He was looking at Bruce with an expression that had moved through bewilderment and arrived somewhere else entirely, somewhere quieter, somewhere that in another man might have been called respect, but in Sue presented as a kind of focused hunger. I need to understand this. That was what his eyes said. Bruce noticed. He walked over to Sue, not hurrying, and stood beside him, not opposite him, beside him. Your Kyokushin is real. Your power is real. Your conditioning. He shook his head, a small gesture of genuine acknowledgement. That's serious work. Years of serious work. Sue said nothing, listening. But you're thinking in straight lines, he continued. Your training teaches you to go through the opponent. My training teaches me to make the opponent's straight line mean nothing. He picked up 2 empty paper cups from a nearby folding table. He placed one upright. He put the second beside it, knocked at an angle. Force against force. One cup hits the other. Somebody goes down. That's karate. That's wrestling. That's boxing. Whoever has more force wins. He paused. But if the cup is no longer where the force arrives... He moved the standing cup slightly to one side. The imaginary force passed through empty air. Nothing happens, and the force becomes your problem. Sue looked at the cups. He looked up at Bruce. That's it, he said quietly. That's all of it. Bruce smiled. Small, brief, real. That's all of it. The evening ended without ceremony. People gathered their things. Conversations resumed in low voices. Raymond Chu shook Bruce's hand, and held it for a moment longer than a handshake requires. Hollis left first. He walked out without speaking to anyone. The door closed behind him, and no one watched him go because everyone was quietly determined not to make that moment larger than it needed to be. Hollis was not a bad man. He was not a villain. He was simply a man who had walked into a room carrying a belief and walked out without it, and that is one of the loneliest feelings in the world. Webb lingered. As people filed out, he approached Bruce near the far wall. He extended his hand. Bruce shook it. I owe you an apology, Webb said. The dancing comment. That wasn't me, but I laughed. I shouldn't have. Bruce looked at him. Forget it. I don't want to forget it, Webb said. I want to remember it, so I don't do it again. Bruce nodded once. That was enough. Sue was the last to leave. He stood in the doorway for a moment, coat on, hands in his pockets. He turned back and looked at Bruce across the empty room. Is there somewhere I can train? He asked. I mean... He paused, searching for the right word. Properly. Bruce looked at him for a long moment. Come to the school on Monday, he said. Early. Sue nodded. He left. The door closed. Bruce stood alone in the gymnasium. The folding chairs, the buzzing lights, 2 paper cups on a table. He picked up his tea, cold one now, and finished it.
Word traveled, the way word always traveled in the martial arts world of 1967. Quietly, specifically, and with increasing texture each time it passed through new hands. By the following week, 12 people had a story. By the month's end, 30 people were telling a version of it. By summer, it had taken on the dimensions that true stories take on when they cannot be easily explained. They grow wider because the truth at their center is simply too concentrated for ordinary language to contain. Some versions said Bruce had knocked all 3 men down. He hadn't. Some versions said there had been blood. There wasn't. Some versions inflated the size of the opponents, the reputation of the witnesses, the length of the encounter. That is the nature of legend.
It rounds the edges off the truth and replaces them with something grander. But the core remained. 3 experienced, decorated, powerful fighters had tried to demonstrate that Kung Fu could not stand against real martial force. And Bruce Lee had made them feel, each of them, in their own way, in their own moment, that they were simply not in the conversation. Not because he was bigger, not because he was meaner, because he understood something they didn't. He understood that combat is not a display of force, it is a conversation between intentions, and the man who can read the other's intention before it becomes action, before the shoulder drops, before the foot shifts, before the decision fully leaves the mind, that man is not fighting his opponent. He has already finished the conversation before the other man has said his first word. The footage from that night, 2 cameras, 40-odd minutes of tape, was never publicly released. Raymond Chiu kept the reels. He said years later in a private interview that he watched them many times, that he gave copies to no one, that he was afraid, and he used that word deliberately, afraid, that if people watched without the proper context, they would miss what he had actually witnessed. It wasn't violence, he said. It looked like violence from a distance, but up close, it was something closer to music. You can't show music to someone who can't hear. Bruce Lee would go on to redefine what the world understood about martial arts, about human potential, about the relationship between mind and body and time. He would train actors and fighters and thinkers. He would write philosophy in notebooks at 2 in the morning. He would lift weights that confused bodybuilders and move with speed that confused cameras. He would build a school of thought that had no walls, and no belt, and no trophy, and no ceiling. He would be gone at 32, too soon, impossibly soon, in the way that certain people are always taken before the world has finished learning from them. But on that evening in Santa Monica, in a gymnasium with buzzing fluorescent lights and 12 witnesses and 2 cups on a folding table, he taught 3 men something they would carry for the rest of their lives. Not that they were weak, not that their training was worthless, not that size and strength and years of discipline meant nothing. He taught them that all of those things, the trophies, the titles, the muscle, the technique, were tools, and tools are only as good as the mind that holds them. He taught them that the greatest weapon is not the one that hits hardest, it is the one that understands before the other weapon has been raised. Hollis never publicly spoke about that evening. He continued competing and teaching for another decade. Those who trained under him said he was different after 1967, more precise, less loud, more likely to stop a sparring session and ask why instead of how. Webb sought out Eastern martial philosophy seriously in the years that followed. He studied, he changed. Sue came to Bruce's school on Monday morning, early as instructed. He trained there for 2 years. He never talked about what had happened in the gymnasium. When students asked him about Bruce Lee, he would think for a moment, and then he would say the same thing every time. He wasn't fighting you, he was showing you yourself. They called Kung Fu dancing. They were right in a way they didn't intend. Because the greatest dancers don't fight the music, they move with it. They don't resist the rhythm, they become it. They don't overpower the space, they fill it, precisely, completely, without waste. Bruce Lee moved with the moment. He moved with the opponent's intention, with the physics of force, with the geometry of human aggression. He didn't fight against what was coming. He was simply already past it. 3 men walked into that room believing that size was power. They walked out understanding something far more frightening, that a man who has mastered himself has already mastered you. Before you moved, before you spoke, before you decided, he was already there, waiting, still. The successful warrior is the average man with laser-like focus. Bruce Lee. If this story hit you the way it hit me the first time I found it, subscribe. This channel exists for the moments that history almost forgot, the confrontations that never made headlines, the lessons that were never filmed, never published, never packaged, just passed quietly between the people who were there. Hit the bell, because the next story is already waiting, and it's even harder to believe.